Hello everyone, welcome to WayWORD Festival 2021. Thanks for coming along. Just have to say it's brought to you by the Word Centre for Creative Writing, Aberdeen University, and welcome to Aberdeen itself. Also have to mention Creative Scotland are involved in financing. And since we're talking books, please don't forget that Blackwell's bookshop at the university and the campus is stocking a lot of the books that Alice and I will talk about today. Just a few housekeeping things. My name's Alan Warner. I'm a lecturer in creative writing at the university. Delighted to welcome Alison today. You'll notice that there's a Q&A button at the bottom of your screens, and you can use this during the event and towards the end of the event to ask any questions you want to ask. So please think up some questions and fire them in, and after Alice and I have talked, I'll try and incorporate as many of those as I can at the end. I have to thank Annie and I have to thank Kirsty, who are my trusty chairs on the tech here today. And thanks to Leslie Creer, who you should be able to see, who's doing BSL, who will interpret our storm-tossed minds as they go to work. And you can also use the CC button to access captioning at the bottom. So those are all available to you. But do think about your questions that you could put into the Q&A so that we can incorporate that into the event itself. Format's very simple, of course. Just I'll talk for a few moments about a few minutes probably about Alison's work. And then Alison's going to read from two pieces. She's going to read from a short story called Treated for Starlings that was published in Esquire magazine that's involved with, that considers lockdown, COVID lockdown, an exquisite piece of writing. And she's also going to read an excerpt from her new collection, the best, most relevant title we've seen in a long time. We are attempting to survive our times, as we all are. A title that she concocted just before COVID arrived, so it was very timely, if darkly amusing. So I'll talk for a moment about Alison's work and what that's meant to me over the years. A profound writer and often a very, very funny writer, but I encountered her work before I was a published author. Her first collection of stories, Night Geometry and the Gerskaden Trains. That's a book that immediately singled her out as a different voice from a lot of the contemporary voices that were around in Scottish literature at that time. Distinctive, thoughtful, reflective, and it stood out for me as a kind of brave work that was slightly coming at contemporary social realism in Scottish literature from a new angle. And then I followed her work from then on through her early novels and many collections of short stories, looking for the possible dance. And in 1999, she published an absolutely remarkable novel, Everything You Need. This is a novel featuring a writer called Nathan Staples, I think, a deeply troubled and dark character who's trapped on an island, perhaps an island similar in some ways to Sark and the Channel Islands, where Alison's joining us from today. Dark exploratory stuff, unveiling, as Alison does so much, the inner world of characters. Nathan is a troubled man who's in poor health and has lied to his daughter about the true nature of their relationship. So a profound novel that probably should have got more attention than it did at the time. I followed her work on through the years. Up until recently, she had Seriously Sweet published, I think 2016, that was on the Booker long list, a novel that attempts to look at perhaps a good man, a good person, which is a rare thing to approach in contemporary literature, rather than going for the normal. If you think about her position in Scottish writing, if you think of the writer James Kelman, our great Scottish novelist and short story writer, Kelman strikes us obviously as a writer who's deeply involved in evoking the consciousness. He's a kind of legislator of the consciousness, a pathologist of the consciousness, looking into the human mind and looking at how language flows outward through our consciousness in quotidian daily life. And he does that exquisitely. And Alison's work does something largely similar. But as well as that, I would argue that there's a patina, a moral concept around the work, a kind of moral pathology of the characters is going on all the time that I think she's very aware of, very subtle about, and it's sensitively and carefully accumulated as you read, so that a moral question always surrounds the characters, even in the short stories, as you'll probably hear in an excerpt from a short story just in a few moments. And conversely, or aligned to that, inquiry into consciousness and thought and morality is an amazing lyricism, a lyricism that is pretty rare in writing these days, and a lyricism directly involved really in evoking nature. Alison's one of those touched writers who simply has an infinite well of metaphor, of simile, and of ability to evoke nature. And when you combine the lyricism and the profound and often darkly funny content of the work, you really come across one of the most major and skilled writers really in Britain today. And the prizes have come. I think it's notable and interesting that many of those prizes have come from out with the UK. The Heinrich Heine Award comes from Dusseldorf, the Austrian State Prize for Literature, a Lannan Award, which are incredibly rare awards to go to any writer. And she's hit the jackpot. She's had a hat trick with the Granta Young British Writers Under 40, because Alison began writing so young, when she was 24, 25, and publishing at that age, that she's been on that short list, well, the winning list twice. And that's just goes to show how accomplished her early work was. So it's a real pleasure for me, a personal pleasure and a professional one, to welcome Alison among us today from Sark. So hiya, Alison, and how are you doing?
I'm good. Goodness me, that's a very thoughtful. Yeah.
Oh, not at all. And more profoundly thoughtful than that is I was trying to work out when we physically last met, and I think it was 2003 at the Granta photo shoot for the Sunday Times magazine. I don't know if you remember that. It was like a football team of us. A football team of writers is a terrifying thing.
Yeah, and they always and it's always a terribly posh photographer, and they have to sort of say, do something with your hand, and it's like, well, I'm thinking of something I could do with my hand, but you would not like it. Yeah, because we don't. I mean, you know, writers were either at home doing the writing thing or we're on tour, and they would. In normal times, and we don't meet that
normal
much.
Times, yes.
Yeah, whatever that was.
Well, you're spot on, because what I remember about him is him trying to get Monica Ali to take her cardigan off. That was his main motivation. So we'll say no more. We'll say no more.
Yeah.
So look, let's have a look at and a talk about these two pieces today at your leisure. What would you like to have a look at first, the Esquire piece or from your new collection?
Well, maybe do them in chronological order. I'll read a bit from what now seems very old book, the book of short stories, but technically, I mean, it never came out really, because it came out on the first day of the first lockdown. So it's out, but it's not out.
Wow.
It's now in paperback.
Yeah, you said that was a problem because it virtually sold nothing because it arrived in this social void.
You couldn't buy it. Yeah, because there nothing was moving. If you remember, nobody was in the book warehouses to move the books. Bookshops weren't open. Everything stopped. So an
incredible time.
Yeah, I mean, you know, it was the least of the problems happening, but it was a bit weird. It would have been nice if the publisher, when everything opened up again, sort of made an effort, but they didn't. So there we go.
But what a title! I mean, how could you have a less apt title for what was going to unfold in the world over the next 18 to 20 months? And a terrible time it's been. And I know you
Well,
yourself
yeah.
were struck by COVID in a personal way, also, just to add on top of it.
Yeah, I sort of suspected, and then the more the symptoms came out, yeah, I got it very early. I suspect it may be a Tutankhamun exhibition, or somehow January 2020, felt as ill as I've ever felt, really, no sense of smell, headache for months, blah, blah, blah. And extreme wakefulness, and the extreme wakefulness never went away. And it kind of, the post-viral thing affected my thyroid. So the story from Esquire, I was asked for a story in the usual way. You've finished a book of short stories, and then some magazine, thank goodness, will say, do you have a new book of a new short story? And it's exactly the time when you have no new short story, because you just done a book and you never want to see one again. And I had a week to write one, and I said, as long as you don't mind it being about the pandemic, because that's all that's going to be in my head or everybody else's head. And they said, no, that's fine. So it was possible to write from scratch a short story from zero to final draft in a week by the simple expedient of not going to sleep for a week. Which,
oh dear.
which I didn't reflect on that being a little bit odd.
Yeah.
And it took a few months for me to sort of feel a bit better, and also think, I'm sure I used to go to sleep at night. I'm sure my days were not 24 hours long. And I'm getting a bit clumsy, and I can't do sentences. And
yeah.
And eventually I texted a friend who would know these things and said, is this like being on cocaine but without the fun? And he texted back, well, there's no fun with cocaine either. But it was like constantly, yeah, it was like being constantly fed some kind of stimulant without wanting it.
But interestingly, the character in the story, who's beautifully evoked, doesn't seem to be actively suffering from the disease. It's that more general thing we all experienced of fear, or certainly in my own case, outright fear, and how everything, for every level of experience had changed. People who you wanted to be with were both a source of delight, but also a source of danger. So these strange inversions of normality happened so quickly. And if you have a novelist's imagination, I certainly was waiting for the power stations to close down and the supermarkets to empty and apocalypse to arrive. But that's a novelist's imagination, but it was terrifying, and it was deeply sad.
Yeah,
the death toll mounted.
Yeah, and so, preventable. I mean, I'm sitting on Sark, which is a little island that you get to via Guernsey. Guernsey itself is not very big, and their priority was to stop people dying. So they have.
Yeah.
And Sark only has about 500 people living here. They've had, under 10 cases, because they've done the stuff that means you don't get, you don't have to let everybody die.
Yeah, the national differences have been striking and alarming. That's for sure.
Yeah, but we not to over-egg it, but we decided art wasn't important. What does art do? It makes you empathize with people. It puts you in somebody else's head. It makes you think about the tenderness and the love and all of the unnecessary things. When you muffle all of that and all you hear are the sort of most demeaned fictions like reality TV and lies that you make up about refugees and blah, 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 then you're set to go for the next thing that keeps everybody safe, which is the law. And suddenly judges are the enemies of the people, and suddenly you don't fund the law. So there kind of is no court system because it's so backlogged, and there aren't enough lawyers, and there isn't enough time, and then you destroy democracy.
Yeah,
and you could see it coming, but a certain type of mind looks at a massive disaster for all of humanity and thinks, ka-ching,
yeah,
I can make money. providing no PPE at all, ever. I can get paid millions to provide you with absolutely nothing. And have some weird theory that all of my friends are genetically superior to people I haven't met. So it doesn't matter if the people I haven't met die, because they're, you know, decrease the surplus population, as Mr. Scrooge said.
Yes, the pensions issue. Do you think overall the experience will be an engine for art, or will be a negative thing? It's obviously been a negative thing in the immediate experience,
Yeah.
but in the long run.
I think it'll be lots of things, but if we're smart, we'll remember what got us through, and what got us through and kept us as sane as we could be was remembering that we love the people we love, remembering that we can do anything for them, including not see them.
Sure.
And remembering really in that first week, particularly, what made you cry, what made you smile, what made you keep going? Reading, poems, people putting theatre on Zoom, people singing on Zoom. What the hell is Zoom? I hadn't heard of Zoom 5 years ago.
Neither had I, yeah.
You know, 2 weeks later, I'm watching free drama from the National Theatre. Immediately, people knew there was no pause for what would lift spirits, what would immediately, every possible kind of art, and everybody saying, apart from a single leaf is remarkable, apart from aren't the birds amazing, apart from when we're not being kept busy by capitalism and just endlessly weary and doing 8-hour days and not achieving 8 hours of work, and it's just all about stopping us thinking. You know, we have a core, and there's a sort of certain truth to us which is not unpleasant. And that, you know, we teetered on this moment where everybody was together and everybody really was going through the same thing, and it took a real hard pushback to say, okay, but how do we shatter this? How do we make it that some people won't wear a mask? How do we make it that some people won't get vaccinated? How do we make it that some people won't care if strangers live or die? How do we blow this apart? Because for a couple of weeks, we nearly had a unified world where everybody on Earth was washing their hands, worried about what they were inhaling, worried about the people they loved, running out of toilet paper, apart from all the people who culturally don't use toilet paper, who were finding it hilarious. You know,
in Westminster.
Yeah. So, you know.
When do you think that began to disintegrate? When do you think that unity began to break up?
Oh, a couple of weeks, because I mean, not to be conspiracist, but I mean, the same culture warriors and psychological manipulators who, you know, engineered Brexit and engineered everybody that's currently in our government and engineered Bolsonaro and engineered Trump. You know, they had an infrastructure of Facebook craziness and QAnon craziness, and that was all good to go. The sock puppets and the bots and trolls and the websites and the people. You know, they were all ready. And they've done the research, you know, after World War II, psychologists, social psychologists and sociologists did loads of research to say, how did the whole country go that wrong? And then invade other countries. How did they control those countries? How did this all go so horribly badly wrong? And they analyzed it and found out, and in theory, we now have a toolkit for if you don't do those things, then you don't create a hellmouth. It'll always be a different hellmouth, but it'll always be the same hellmouth. It's like Primo Levi said, those railway tracks always lead to Auschwitz. It'll be a different Auschwitz every time, but it's always going to go there. If you do those things, you're always building railway tracks. But some people sat there and went, okay, so if we do all of those things, we get to have a profitable hellmouth.
Sure.
Let's do all of those things, but do them online. So, you know, we can kill people without ever going anywhere near them. We can get them to kill themselves. We can get them to take horse dewormer. We can get them to
Yes.
drink bleach. I can get
Drink
rangers
bleach.
to drink bleach.
I found myself just absolutely riveted to Trump's broadcasts. I couldn't stop watching them, the same way I can't, stop watching an erupting volcano and the havoc that it's causing. It was similar with Trump. I couldn't, for 2 weeks, I must have watched his remarkable press conferences.
No, it's like watching a toddler having diarrhea. I don't know how fascinating that is. Like in the long term, it's different shades, but it's all brown.
Remarkable.
Oh, so there we go. Yeah.
Oh, but getting back to the story, you have decided to make the focus of someone. It's a loving story and a very tender and beautiful story about a marriage, because that's what happened essentially. Many of us had to rethink our relationships, physically reform our relationships. Suddenly people were trapped together who weren't used to spending that amount of time together. And this piece is a beautiful examination of what can erupt under those circumstances.
Cool. Well, I'm going to read things have happened. We have already begun. We know that this couple has been together. They've done sourdough, they've cleaned the cupboards, they've alphabetized the DVD, they've done all of those things. They've made lots of pots of soup. They've bought vegetables they've never bought before, not know what to do with them. And we know that she's called Anne, we know that her husband is called her husband, and we know that at this point in the story, she's out having a walk and she is not with her husband. So we kind of pick up, she's just walked past. If you remember that 2020 spring, it was extraordinarily beautiful, and the bluebell woods, I think all over the UK were, as if somebody had taken with the bluebells and their the name of their little white flowers in his way. It's almost as if you poured a sky out underneath the trees. So she just walked past that. Yeah. So hey ho, I will begin at this point. So there's Anne and there's her husband, and now she's having a walk. Anne is rounding the last of the wood and heading back towards the water when the kestrel stops her. It's nailed in the sky with this kind of authority over her route. Reed tops and branches are swinging, long grasses are being pushed down into roiling waves, but the bird is still. Its whole body is watching, an absolute. Then it throws itself out of the air, drops hard, and stomach lurches with fresh vertigo or anxiety or joy or triumph or some other word for some other emotion. When the kestrel lifts again and turns, its wings gleam almost red. Then it flies from her, dipping its head and tearing its small shape held in one claw. She's glad. We all have to eat. But also she feels the touch of something hard at the back of her neck, quick and then gone. And probably she is crying. That seems fairly certain. Fourth time today, various reasons. She trots to the point where the path makes a kind of shrug and rejoins the berm, looking out across the wet skin of the mudflats, the bones of abandoned boats worn to needle points. Her phone always has reception here, exactly here, where she stands and calls Bill, looks over the creek at that church tower and calls Bill. She is aware this is a remarkably stupid idea. When you're trying to survive, though, you do whatever's necessary. Talking is necessary. Anne. He answers before she expects it and kicks at her pulse. This is her name, but with another taste, the one that he adds. I was waiting. This is the sound of how long he's lived and whether he is smiling. She feels he might be smiling. Am I late? You sound sleepy. Did I wake you? Am I late though? Maybe. Maybe you're late. Not maybe I'm sleepy. I mean, I don't know the time. I've lost my watch somewhere. Are you okay? Everyone keeps asking everyone if they're okay. She's leaning her back to the wind, his voice held in the shelter of both hands. Are you okay? I'm not bad. She came 5 or 6 miles out to do this, and now all she's got is small talk. It's very beautiful out here, but the details of her walk fragment and she can't describe them. She might almost have dreamed the journey and still be at home where she can't talk. With so much weather going on, it's not easy to tell, but Anne believes she hears his breath become a sigh. If they were resting, please, just at peace together, please, on the bed, hip against hip, then a sigh would shift their touch in closer. I do love the people I love. You're meant to do that. You're meant to follow along behind that and be protected because you are doing what is right. Apparently, she is sobbing. Anne pulls out a tissue and wipes her eyes, her nose, this making her gloves condemned things that she will throw directly into the wash, and this also making the tissue a terrible object. It's very tiring, the essential constant weariness. I want a day when one thing that matters gets better instead of worse, instead of broken, instead of vandalized. A proper cry is supposed to do good. Anne clears her throat. You can't say I'm not a trier. But before she can speak, he starts. My dad used to tell me when someone was ill and he didn't know the details. Oh, she's being treated for starlings. He's under the doctor, treated for starlings. It was his joke. I was only wee and I thought it was like mumps or chicken pox. A chicken is a bird. I thought you could catch starlings. He pauses to let her join in, but she's looking at the red inside her eyelids and failing to picture his face. She holds on to the story. In the end, I found out it was an architectural thing, a city corporation thing. They had too many starlings, so they got rid of them from buildings. I don't know if that meant clearing nests and filling gaps or installing nets and spikes and such. I hope it was only that. You'd have your office block or your tenement treated for starlings. That was the term. He stops again and lets him. She's imagining red sandstone and high narrow windows and sunsets boiling at the foot of the Byres Road. Glasgow, the city of arts and of crafts, every evening wicking what's left of the stained glass in the porches. When there's trouble, you want to go home. Or you want to know that home is still all right, and home can be the place where you were first content. It can be the place that gave you people you could love. For years, I thought starlings was the worst thing you could catch. He's getting difficult to hear. Dad got the mesothelioma from his work. Mum got it from his jacket and from carrying his shirt and overalls to the wash. Anne tells him, I miss you. She only ever seems to say that when he's already preoccupied. She has bad timing. Up in the co-op where they all dance to keep their 6-foot perimeters intact, these taut sections of air, she feels other shoppers notice her rhythms off. She says, I remember the starlings. That isn't a lie. Once during her first year in Glasgow, she'd been slightly lost and had made for Central Station to start again. You can always start again from a known fixed point. She had been heading up along Broomielaw, thought she was looking up at nothing but the girders and complications of a railway bridge, and then the mass of birds had risen from it as if they'd been conjured from nowhere and were one thinking, twisting thing that reached out and flexed across the width of the skyline and made the noise of waterfalls. They blurred and flowed and scattered and then compacted, hung there like, I don't know. It looked like a bad thing bound to happen. It looked like now. There's too long silence. Bill has no more words than she does. They have that in common. Then she hears his breath slip and press at the receiver between hurt sounds, tiny sounds. He is making lost child sounds and she can't hold him. Bill? The phone rests against her cheek, a useless thing, which is the opposite of touching. She wants the temperature of his hands and the way he'll pause in doorways and not quite come in until she looks at him, as if that's a necessary step. She wants. Bill? Bill? It's like listening to a crying boy. She hears herself ask him, should we maybe stop? Is that it? Maybe we shouldn't keep doing this. Should we stop? Bill. A handful of oyster catchers startle and take fright, squealing. I plead, I plead, I plead, I plead. Whatever Bill says before he hangs up gets lost in the din. Afterwards, she stands for a long while. Time isn't easy to judge anymore, but when she takes the straight route home along the dike, she has to race the sunset. So this took us hours, hours and hours. At least it's a good path. No one else on it is late. It's sensible to look for positives in every circumstance. The path is smooth going with excellent sight lines, no surprises, fine whitish gravel that shows her the way even when it's really too dark to be out. And their house is still there where she left it when she gets back, and her key still fits the lock, and there's still the drawing of a rainbow in the living room window, faded slightly by the sun already, so its colors are strange. Her husband is in the kitchen peeling potatoes, although they have a soup made for tonight. He likes to keep busy. He has put on fresh jeans and the blue checked shirt as if it's 8-10 weeks ago, 3 months ago, last Christmas, when they used to do all of that traveling, all of that meeting people and dressing up. His hair is too fine to be manageable when it's overlong, but he has brushed it away from his forehead, which means that he seems mildly biblical. He's making moves towards being someone else, differently expressed. I love, but he doesn't look at her, keeps working. So she goes and stands behind him, rests her forehead to touch his back, his breath, the space between his shoulder blades. His shirt smells of their English garden and his skin. The bluebells were. She doesn't get to finish because he flinches and hisses in air through his teeth, pulls away. What's the matter? Then he's leaning at the sink, running the cold tap, and blood, and unstoppable blood, is washing from the knuckle of the forefinger on his left hand. The sight of him hurt swings the kitchen floor just for a moment. There are threads of red drifting across the white porcelain, curling as the water flows. The peeler has furrowed out a deep strip of flesh, and why has she never noticed before what an obvious risk the blade is? The thing is lying abandoned on the counter, red and surgical. Anne kisses his unharmed hand. I'll get the plasters. You keep going with that and it'll stop bleeding, and I'll get the plasters. We have plasters. Poor boy. We'll be all right. Don't go. So she doesn't. Anne snugs her arm around his waist, feels panic in the muscles of his back. She returns his safe hand to her lips and shuts her eyes. He mustn't need stitches. We mustn't have accidents that need stitches. We mustn't have accidents. The place at the back of her neck aches. It feels naked. Anne, I'm not going. Next time you walk, I'll come with you. Okay, we'll do that then. Okay, we'll do that. Her husband keeps bleeding as much as before. He turns his head and looks at her and seems beautiful, like a sky poured under birches. The situation is terrible, but it makes certain instants come clear. You find you can see reality flare up, true and lovely. People often remark on this, how they are overwhelmed by the color of an ordinary leaf or an ordinary songbird's melody. Things are becoming transcendent. Or we're desperate for transcendence, so we find it. Anne has an ordinary, transcendent husband. She could almost whisper because he's so near. They say things are coming back or coming in closer. Wild boar and goats and pumas, whales, elephants. There have been sightings of pterosaurs, flying pterosaurs on lizard wings. I don't know what any of that could mean, except that maybe anything can change into anything else. Maybe we've earned the possibility of that. But she tells her husband, Bill, we'll go and take the walks together and we won't do the phone calls anymore, if that's what you want. Is that what you want? Both his hands lift as if he wants to smooth his hair, but then he remembers he can't and pauses long enough for blood to trickle down over his wrist and his shirt cuff. Shit, it'll stain. He stares while the blood keeps on and the stain gets bigger. I'll get the plasters. But she doesn't leave him yet. We'll find out how to do this. We can be in the same house together, and we can talk in the same house, and we can be us. I like us. I like you. You said you missed me. That's how I knew I shouldn't be away. We're out of practice. I know. It's a shitty time. I know. And then they kiss, and she remembers kissing him 20 years ago. Things come back. They come closer. I never knew that we were wildlife. She doesn't know they won't frighten each other back into the woods. They eat dinner later, gently, after they've patched up Bill's hand, and then they discover they're both too tired to watch a film. She thinks it will be pleasant to have a long bath and then join her husband in their bed. They have a king size, more space, not solitude, only harmless space. The new silence outside is still shoving against their walls and window glass when she lies down and Bill turns out the light. He moves to her and holds her as if they are both falling. Sam called. He wanted to thank you for the jar of lemon curd. When you can't be at home, you want to eat it. Bill's chest rises and something in the motion makes her know. Here's the dark on its way. He's still in oncology, but they've got him on a ward with suspected infections. He goes to that ward for suspected infections. They don't get the full kit, only for the definite infections. That's the protocol, what they have. That's what they have. And she feels their bodies start the fall. I didn't say anything. Everywhere people are not saying anything because that is the only way they can save each other. At least don't name it. At least don't do that. I didn't say anything. We'll get kit, we'll buy kit, we'll find kit. There's that charity, there's a few. They sometimes have kit. We'll have to get kit for all of them, not fake kit, for all of them, if we're allowed, which it has to be allowed. We have to be allowed. I'm not sure how long it takes to come. I'm not. He's tired. He said that he was tired. He's working too hard. And Bill says, I told him. And both of them are falling so fast. He sent his love. And both of them sound like new people they don't want to be. All the words they say ripped away in the dark, fast and faster. He'll call again. He'll call again. They're so fast. They're impossible. And there's this noise under everything, like thousands of waterfalls, thousands of wings, like machinery pressing breath into drowning lungs. She's trying not to think. There's no such thing as grief. There's only love and fury. They make this one thing with this other name. She holds her husband. Please don't take our son. Please don't take our son. Please don't take our son. There's nothing else.
Thank you. It's a exquisite thing that examines both the fragility of a family and also its tenacity. But again, that thing I mentioned at the beginning about the lyricism and the interplay of nature. In this sequence, in this whole story, in fact, nature is both the threat and in some ways the salvation as well. But I wonder, you see the kestrel at the beginning of the extract you read. So there's an immediate threat, and then there's a conference of birds in another sense, and that the rest of the birds are so benign. And the exquisite and very delicate description of the nature is in some ways a salvation for her. And do you think, I'm curious, Alison, in like a general sense, is nature a salvation for us? Is it? Or have we found it recently more so of a retreat and a rationality and a meaning in our lives than before? Or is that an anthropomorphic view because we're not fighting for our lives in the middle of the Amazon jungle? Nature turns the other way. COVID itself is a product of nature. How do we square the benign world of nature and the hostile world of nature?
I think the thing that's benign is that if you're in nature, it gives you scale, because we are very small. And if you're in any way, I mean, you know, one of the things that if you want to be inspired, go to a big glen, go to the top of a mountain, be on the sea, jump, you know, I kayak. There's something enormously relieving and inspiring, and I think morally, politically, personally, spiritually useful to realize how tiny you are. A lot of human problems are from this idea that if I get enough billions and I buy an electric penis that I can fire into space and ride into a mythical future where I'd still am not going to have enough money to really recreate life anywhere else. Somehow, if I become that important, everything will be fine. And it's just, no, you're committing suicide, but you're taking us with you because you have the money that we would use to save the planet we're on. So, I mean, you know, nature doesn't care. And it's good to know that there are things that are not about me.
Absolutely, yes.
You know? And then once you've established that, you can start to think, well, if nature doesn't care and we're all going to die and there are many available horrible deaths, maybe we'll focus on trying to avoid them for the greatest number of people and making life as pleasant as possible. And going with the grain. I mean, yeah, you know, me in the Amazon, it would kill me. But if I'd grown up in the Amazon, I mean, you know, the indigenous people know how to live there in the way that the Inuit know. I mean, not how to live in every snow-blasted wilderness. You can't just move them around because it's incredibly hard to know like a featureless landscape that's constantly trying to grow you. So there are transferable skills, but they're not that transferable. But you know, again, the indigenous people, because they go with the grain of things, areas where they're in charge are generally not denuded and wasteland and toxic and both on fire and flooded.
And I'm sure COVID itself means that many of these rethinks that we're having in terms of our relationship to the natural world and to animals need rethought. And these thoughtful characters, these unambiguous characters in the sense that they reflect familial love and the care and concern they have for their son and the danger with the lack of personal protection that he's going to be in his job, come to point beautifully clearly. And that contrasts very strongly to the ambiguous moral nature of the character in the story Panic Attacks. If we have time to read a little bit of that, that would be great. But this is a character who, again, another feature in nature if you're writing is a certain moral ambiguity over characters. I was not sure about that character until the very end of the piece and still remain unsure of that character's motivations. And exactly how toxic a male is this male on the toxic scale. And it was beautifully ambiguous in that sense. So a more defined character than in this story.
Yeah, he's sort of an angry man. But, you know, I just keep remembering of that Scottish thing, you know, that thing. If I tell you, you were told. You know, we were told there would be more superbugs and there would, you know, these are the consequences of global warming and climate change.
Yeah.
You were told you.
Yeah, virologists were predicting it. Even at the last SARS outbreak, virologists were clearly predicting what was going to happen.
That's why the vaccine was so fast. It's not because it's evil. It's because some people actually thought it might rain. We'll get an umbrella.
And there was a hospital. There was a hospital in the north of Spain that actually bought in protection almost 9 months ago, because the manager in charge of that hospital did predict that one day this would happen, and all the workers in the hospital had private protection all the way through it, and the survival rates were considerably affected the positive in that hospital rather than the absolute carnage that happened in the other hospitals.
Yeah, I mean, you know, we were told in a report all of your stockpiles are out of date, and when the bad thing happens, stock stats, things to preserve life.
But look, time always presses on in these events. So do you think you have time to read a small section of the other story?
I'll read a little
then we can
bit,
try and
Ronnie.
take some. Yeah, we'll try and take some questions after that.
Yeah.
So do send in questions if you have them, please.
Yeah, Ronnie's basically constantly angry, and he's on
angry guy.
He's in the waiting area of King's Cross. I do quite like him, but he comes across as quite sort of terrible until the end. But I'm just going to do a little bit of him to get kind of the idea of him. But he's looking about, you know, he's waiting for a train, and there's really no train in view. So yeah. Ronnie is jigging on the spot, searching his pockets for nothings, acting out an impatience he doesn't feel while examining an indicator board that is, as it happens, being quite evasive about his train. There is fulsome information available on a number of other trains that are scheduled to depart much later than his own, platform numbers, confirmations of timeliness, even instructions to board. His service is simply listed as existing. But stuff changes. Add time to anything and it will change. You can wait and get your satisfaction. That's possible. Ronnie is so noticeable, so stridently ill at ease that he has cleared a significant ring in the would-be passengers scattered and gaggled about him. He spins yet again to study the figures, the faces behind him. He might almost be at large in a hostile landscape, clinging fronds of alien Viet Cong wetness blocking his view, or expanses of dusty jihadi concealment, Romelish foxholes. So many enemies are available as inspiration. He frowns, his eyes staying calm while his face approaches fury. He is a quandary to those who do not know him. He is Ronnie. Not a woman, you can't, no touching. He's slightly obsessive about this idea of not touching women, which obviously is slightly disturbing. Yeah. I don't know why that's going to. Women are present at the station, naturally. There are women standing in the open, unconcernedly on all sides, at ease in the crowds. Women, old blokes, a priest who might be a vicar or a pastor or one of those kinds of job titles, one of that Christian lot. You can't differentiate, can you? Then there's couples, kids, and solo bastards who've got rucksacks. You'll always see an attitude with a rucksack. You'll always see smugness about the feats the rucksack owner could perform. And you can tell it's bollocks. You can tell that it's just a student taking home washing to his mum. That one's fake military. He's pretending to be a squaddy on leave, but he's not. He's just a wanker with some army surplus and a fucking rucksack. Over towards the shop, which sells shit sandwiches and pots of other shit that nobody's saying would eat. Like, you want to eat something mixed in a bowl like you're a cat or something? Over that way towards the shop, there's a man with a beard and a woman beside him. The man looks uncomfortable, and Ronnie wants, quite urgently, to be absolutely sure why, because the woman is shaking. It's not a hipster bastard beard he's got, not the full Gandalf, I have mice in here nonsense either. Average beard, not a white bloke trying to show off being Muslim, not that. The way he looks, round shoulders and a little box set watcher's belly, is just slack. The beard is because he can't be bothered shaving. That's all it is. Laziness is growing right across him, springing out, plain on his face. I bet he says he's got sensitive skin, prone to shaving rash and spots. I bet he keeps ointments round the side of the bath and is full of weaknesses and talks about them. I bet he hasn't got a bath, shower, mildew in the curtain, and towels with no colour left in them anymore. No self-respect. I bet. The woman is still shaking.
Thank you, Alison. There's a whole range of voices you use throughout the collection, and I really do recommend people track down and buy this book, because it's
You can now buy it. It doesn't.
you can now buy it. And on a nice note, Ethel Smith has put into the chat, you might not think so, but we all do, that that story is well worth the not sleeping, which is very, very true. Look, a couple of questions in quickly, if we can. Time always runs away in these things. Lewis has an interesting question, and it's about transitioning between fiction and non-fiction. You wrote a fantastic book about bullfighting. And
Sure.
Lewis was asking, was it easy to transition out of non-fiction and straight back into fiction?
Yeah, I think a lot of the categories like short story, novella, novel, drama, blah, it's just you're telling stories about people or person-like entities, and you're writing the story hopefully in a form that's a good form for what it is. Like, you couldn't spin out a novel to be, you know, from a short story. You couldn't whack a novel into a short story. You know, if I'm doing stand-up, which I occasionally still do, that way of, we all have different ways of saying, you know, if you're talking to a 5-year-old, you generally talk a little bit differently than if you were talking to a 45-year-old, or somebody you hate, or somebody you love, or a dog. You know, we all have different ways of saying, and really there's a literary establishment and lots of complicated words and stuff. But I mean, people were telling each other stories and acting things out and inhabiting people other than themselves for religious and cultural and entertaining reasons long before anybody said, oh, we're going to call that a play and have the unities and have a 5-act structure. And you know, why? I mean, the play is sort of a thing, and you can think, oh, okay, I get that a play is a play, and if we get better at technology, we don't have to have it as a unity of place, because we can have settings.
Yes, yeah.
You know, a string. I remember I was a theatre studies and drama student, and in the 17th century they got much more technical, and they had, you know, sets and things. But basically, all of the descriptions of how they did it was just there was a man somewhere pulling string. There's just lots of rope, just string. It was all a string-based technology, and occasionally going, behold, to the west, and then somebody would pull something with string from the east, and everybody go, oh.
I don't know if I don't like the sound of string-based technology, actually. It would suit me fine. A question has come in.
Years of no lorries.
Yeah, it could well be no petrol and back to strings. A question has come in that could well take up our time. It's the classic, how important is it to consider the lives and deeds of artists when we consider their work, rather than just the work, which opens up a big vista?
Well, the thing is, I think if you were a Nazi or you secretly trod on puppies, it would show.
Yeah.
Your writing would just be spooky and broken, because you would be a spooky and broken person.
The focus would be there, yeah.
Yeah, you know, like
Evelyn
Waugh, super clever, super funny. You know, he's not a nice guy.
Yeah.
And people have told me stories about him, so I know factually not a nice guy. You know, from reading his books, he doesn't write people as if he likes them.
Absolutely.
He writes to laugh at them. So again, it's a sort of game, and somebody can say, oh, blah, 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 went to near place and were inspired by thing, and that writer read that writer. And I've been told I've read all kinds of writers that I haven't read at all. Or when I was starting out, I'd be told, oh, obviously you're heavily influenced by, and I would go and read them because it sounded as if I would like them, but it wouldn't be that I'd been
experienced that. Yeah, that
we all have, because it's nonsense. But I mean, obviously there is a relationship between your life and your work, but I mean, you know, Homer, we don't really know anything about Homer. We don't know anything about who wrote the multiple people who probably wrote Gilgamesh. We don't have to know the author. The point is that the story is what you get. And until, I mean, C.S. Lewis was writing, you know, relatively recently in the 20th century about the fallacy of reading being meeting the author. it's this interaction between a story that came to a particular person to be expressed and that person at a particular time in their life and a particular time in their context. And all of that is interacting, but in multiple kind of butterfly wing effects. I mean, I'm on the island of Sark. When I first came, I'd always wanted to come here because I'd read Mr. Pye when I was young. The Raymond Peake book was actually set on Sark.
Yes. Yes.
But I'd read Gormenghast. And when you come here and you've read Gormenghast, Sark is not like Gormenghast. You know that the person who wrote Gormenghast had been on Sark, and you know from the drawings of the people that he knew the Sark people.
Yeah.
And it is Sark, but it isn't Sark. It's Sark and somebody responding to something very beautiful and powerful and inspirational.
Yes.
It's totally not that, because what we do is we look at reality and it's great and amazing and wonderful, and nature is consoling and nature is educational and there's all kinds of things. And for some reason we also go, yeah, but I could make additional beauty.
Yeah, it's
Maybe
a correlative.
Yeah,
a correlative that we add to.
Yeah, maybe we're sad because we know we're going to die, and it's like, that's lovely, and let's add.
Yeah.
You know, we're constructive. That's why we play Tetris. Otherwise that game doesn't make any sense. You know, we do like to build. There's a lot in us that's very, you know, good and nature based and liable to survive.
Yeah.
And art is a part of that and is closely linked to craft. The theory of it and the marketing of it and the market of it and the economy of it is all nonsense and disempowering.
And where we all come to grief, the work is separate from the market, and I think that's the way it will always be, and that's the way it should be. The market is due to chance, but the art is due to something special and something unique.
And it's the thing, you know, marketing departments, particularly for everything now, is like Mr. Smith and the Orange Penguins was a very successful film. Mr. Smith and the Orange Penguins was a wonderfully successful book. So can we have another book exactly like that? It's like, it won't do as well. And we've already kind of had that book. And the film won't do as well because we've already kind of seen that film. What we want and we love and we're astonished by and becomes a little bit of our personality is the extraordinarily beautiful, wonderful thing that we didn't expect.
Yeah.
We want that.
Perfect, yeah.
And you can't market that. All you can do is get the best people, the widest range, the opposite of what we're doing now, which is, you know, disaster, great, we can just never fund the arts again. You know, and it's like there's somebody on a boat. I guarantee you, it's a nice day. We're not too far from the bit of the channel that poor buggers are in little tiny boats trying to cross. There's somebody on a boat, I guarantee you, who's bringing some story. Yeah. That will save our life, and some fiction, and some additional beauty, and some will to live. Yeah. And we need those people, we need these people, we need the people who've been living here since it was resettled by Elizabeth, this crazy little island.
That's true.
All of that.
That is true diversity.
So we need everybody.
That's what diversity is. When the past and the future meet, and we will see hopefully the results of that, and an end to the resistance and fear of all of that soon, I hope.
Yeah, you've got, you know, because if you really believed all the Darwinian stuff that they mumble about, which is basically if you're an aristocrat, you're always going to survive. Because you know, you're really inbred and it's very unlikely, and you're emotionally traumatized by your education, as have generations been. There's all kinds of things that mean there's a lot not going well for you. As if you really believed in Darwinian principles and the survivor wins and the winner takes all, then you hand the country to the refugees who aren't dead and manage to get here because they have all the qualities that you've said we need. And you're right, you know, and you know, and Britain's been an island for so long, and everybody's come to the islands to join the Huguenots and the Vikings and the blah, blah, blah. I mean, you know, but it's just nonsense. It's just fear and hatred and terror of change, when the only thing that you know is that change is absolutely inevitable, and if you don't go with it, it will crush you.
Yeah, change is life and it is creativity. Well, look, Alison, I'm sorry, but time once again has swept down on us, and it's time to say thank you so much.
Thanks for your comments. We can sort of read them, and I think my mum is on here. Hello, mum, and Mike, who I've never met, but who comes to these things, is on here.
Thank you to everyone for coming along. Especially thank you to Alison for reading so beautifully and for bringing her thoughts to us today.
And thank you for the BSL, because that was
thanks to Leslie for BSL. Thanks to Kirsty and Annie, who handled the tech side. Thank you for all your questions. I'm sorry time ran out, but thanks everyone at WayWORD, to Dr. Helen Lynch, who's our leader and inspiration. And thank you to all of you for coming along to the event as well. Thanks, Alison. Thanks, everyone. Take care.